The concept of trauma is nothing new to us today. Internet culture has adopted the term triggered for users to describe situations in which they were irritated, while the very word traumatized has made its way into our everyday vernacular as an exaggerative phrase for stressed. After PTSD was officially acknowledged and classified as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association in 1980, the concept of trauma has almost become common knowledge and has been widely portrayed in movies, TV shows, and books. Yet, how much do we really know about trauma? Or rather, the question should be phrased, how much do we really understand of the traumatic incident? Is it not the inability to understand that forms the center of trauma? In his account of the Hiroshima bombings, published in The New Yorker in 1946, John Hersey offers this essence of trauma. Survivors still wonder why they lived when so many others died, implying that at the center of trauma lies the fact that one faced death and survived, and that this survival is incomprehensible. Kathy Kareth, a literary scholar, has named this the enigma of survival, as one of the big names in the field of literary trauma studies that arose as a field in the 1990s. Kareth argued in her monumental book Unclaimed Experience that trauma is about the missed encounter with death. Kareth argues that the reason trauma happens is that despite encountering a fatal incident in which one's life is put at risk, one is unable to perceive, recognize, let alone understand it precisely because the encounter is missed. Here it might be helpful to look back on the characteristics of trauma suggested by Sigmund Freud. In Moses and Monotheism, Freud suggests two characteristics of trauma neurosis. First, the person must seem to get away without apparent harm at the time of the accident. And second, the symptoms caused by the shock of the accident must happen only after a period of time. Therefore, in Freud's theory, two elements are required for trauma to be defined. Not only the symptoms that manifest after a certain period that we easily recognize as trauma today, but also the non-experience of the incident at the time. Hence, the two ends of what Freud calls the incubation period of trauma must be met for something to be defined as such. Now we hear the echo of Freud in Kareth's argument that the recognition of the traumatic incident is missed at the time of its occurrence, and that this delay in perception is central in trauma. One is unable to directly experience that fatal incident, but that encounter with death happened, and regardless, one has survived. In this sense, how one came to survive, and the meaning of that survival becomes an enigma that cannot be comprehended, as the survivors of Hiroshima had often wondered, why me? Just as Freud makes his impressively insightful observation in his 1920 essay Beyond the Pleasure Principle that trauma patients wake from their traumatic dreams surprised and in fear, rather than relieved to come back to reality and recognize that their pain was only a dream. This fear in waking up that Freud points out, and what Kareth has called the enigma of survival, lies at the very heart of trauma, an attempt to make sense of this non-experience, this missed encounter, this gap between the knowing and not knowing. And this is precisely what Kareth argues to connect trauma to literature. In the introduction to Unclaimed Experience, she relates trauma to the structure of storytelling, where the truth is revealed as the plot progresses, slowly as time passes. Furthermore, literature is about the complex relationship between what we know and don't know, as much as psychoanalysis and trauma theories are. The concept of trauma reminds one of black holes. It seems to be a more than fitting metaphor, as the two subjects are similar not only in the interest of scholars that surrounds them, but also in qualities such as mass and temporality. Trauma can severely impact its sufferer to the point that its effects permeate one's life each and every day, similarly to the enormous gravitational pull of the black hole that swallows everything around them. They are also similar in that they are not bound by time, and considered atemporal, as trauma patients often feel taken back to the incident constantly, just as the space-time continuum stops to exist in the black hole at the singularity. But most of all, they resemble each other in that they mark the boundary between knowing and not knowing, and therefore the difficulty in their representation. The non-experience that is central in trauma, as Freud and Kareth point out, can be said to constitute the event horizon of the black hole called trauma, where once sucked in, not even light can get out. Hence, survival from this state becomes incomprehensible because nothing is supposed to escape from it. Therefore, while it is possible to theorize both trauma and black holes, it is yet challenging to fully represent them. How do you capture a void that can't be understood within the rules and reason that we believe to define us and our world? Coming back to the relationship between trauma and literature, there is more than a structural resemblance in their relationship, especially regarding representation. The representation of trauma has been a point of contention among scholars within the field, with some arguing the necessity of narrative repair, while others emphasize trauma's essentially anti-narrative quality. How does one begin to describe something that evades comprehension? How can one speak about the unspeakable and the unintelligible? And even if one manages to start, can it be said to be a faithful representation of the void we call trauma? These questions regarding trauma's irrepresentability are not the only problems. As scholars such as Roger Luckhurst and Dominic LaCapra point out, there is also the concern of trauma becoming a fixed trope, as well as the danger that such cultural products could mislead the audience into thinking that the complete truth of the traumatic incident has been found out and mastered, when its effects are still ongoing, a point of caution especially for incidents that form a collective trauma, such as the Holocaust. While these are adequate concerns, especially in this time we live in of the capitalistic mass production of cultural artifacts, there are still reasons for representation as well, as the process of attempting to put it into a narrative and opening up possible ways to talk about it initiates the process of healing, both on the individual and collective level. Literature has been suggested as a worthy contestant to this challenge, as certain formats of writing can try to address both sides of the conflict. While forming a narrative, literature can still address the impossibility of fully representing trauma through different elements such as structure and style. Following this line of thought, postmodern fiction with its characteristics of refusing totality, linearity, and coherence has often been focused on as a possible form of representing trauma in all its complexity. There are continuous developments in studying black holes in fields such as astronomy and theoretical physics. Today we are closer than ever to more fully understanding black holes, with the theorization of soft hairs, ripples on the surface of black holes, that suggest that information of what has fallen into black holes may actually be reserved. The information paradox posed by black holes are on its first steps to being solved. Furthermore, in April 2019, the first ever image of a black hole, that of the supermassive Sagittarius A, taken by the Event Horizon Telescope, was released. It's an orange, donut-shaped image with a black center, showing how the black hole bends space and time around it, and all mass and light within. These discoveries seem to suggest a way in which literature can address trauma as well, while acknowledging the impossibility of fully representing the void at the center. Literature can still articulate its effects, how it bends everything around it, and moreover how individuals are capable of causing ripples even in its aftermath. And perhaps those are the first steps of healing that literature can offer in regard to trauma, that not everything is annihilated, and that survival makes that recognition possible. Because as much as survival presupposes having outlived death, as the saying goes, one lives to tell the tale. Thanks for listening.